Hi, my name is Victoria Rhodes and I'm going to explore the history and the current practices of the pregnant mare urine PMU industry, which basically exists to supply the raw materials to generate hormone replacement therapy, HRT, used to treat menopausal women. I will debate all aspects of this topic, including animal welfare during the collection process, the benefits of HRT to the end user, and consider other alternatives. Please note, some viewers may find some of the images in this video distressing. In the 1920s, scientists discovered that estrogen could be extracted from the human placenta and umbilical cord and then used therapeutically. It was then established that estrogen could be obtained from the urine of pregnant women. And then later, in the mid-1930s, researchers identified that estrogen in the urine of pregnant horses was very similar to human estrogen, and this discovery was the starting point for the PMU industry. Since 1942, Premarin was produced, and since 2009, Premarin has been produced by Pfizer and all PMU ranchers are contracted to them. In the early stages of the PMU collection, urine was collected from the barn floor and was grossly contaminated with bedding and feces. Therefore, the quality of estrogen was poor. To reduce contamination, a harness known as a boot was created to collect the urine but exclude the feces, and although uncomfortable for the horses, this device is still used today. As the benefits of HRT became better understood, there was a corresponding increase in demand for estrogen. Consequently, PMU collection developed into a significant business as existing horse breeding ranches expanded to the PMU production. Between 1960 and 1990, the number of PMU ranches peaked at around 500 sites, housing between 60 to 70,000 mares during October to March collection season. During this rapid expansion, concerns around the welfare of PMU horses were first raised, primarily because the mares were constrained to collection stores for long periods. In response, the recommended Code of Practice for the Management of the Horses in these PMU operations was first published in 1990 by the Province of Manitoba. To establish guidelines for the equine welfare and housing standards, the Code of Practice has since been revised and updated and has now been approved by several other agencies in Canada. In the UK, there is also a Code of Practice for the welfare of horses, and its main elements are almost identical to that of the PMU Code. However, regrettably, that's where the similarity ends. As you can see, the minimum standards for turnout and exercise under the Canadian Code of Practice fall well below the expectations in the UK, and on stabling there is stark differences. PMU mares are constricted to very small collection stores, some as small as 4 foot wide, for long periods, which means they are unable to move at will. Whilst in the UK the recommendations is that a 16-hand horse should have a stable of at least 12 foot by 12 foot and be able to move and lie down at will. The recommendations on access to water are also significantly different, and I'd like to explore this in a little more detail. The payments to the PMU ranchers are based on the concentrations of estrogen and urine they ship, rather than the volume. So the objective is to generate highly concentrated PMU. To drive up concentration levels, the amount of water the PMU horses receive daily is very restricted, as demonstrated by the comparison to even the minimum recommended water intake levels under the UK Code. Research has shown that when water is restricted to below 4 litres per 100 kilograms, the horse will also restrict its food intake, leading to a reduction in body weight. This can cause a prostaglandin increase in the uterine plasma, which may result in an inviable pregnancy. Clearly, this impacts negatively on the welfare of both mare and the foal, but it is unlikely to result in death of the mare. In addition to the points highlighted, there are other examples where the standards of care within the PMU Code would fall well below the requirements of the UK regulation, but in the interest of time, I will leave it here, other than to say it is clear that even if a PMU ranch operates 100% in line with the PMU Code of Practice, and this isn't always the case, it seems undeniable that the code was created primarily to help the PMU industry rather than within the welfare of the animals in mind. Even more concerning for the future is that the PMU operations have begun to expand beyond Canada, and Pfizer are now entering into contracts with PMU farms in Poland, China and Kazakhstan, where animal welfare standards are even lower. To have a more rounded discussion on the PMU industry, we need to consider the view of other stakeholders, such as the menopausal women who use the HRT, the corporations, and the ranchers involved in the production.
The menopause is a natural part of the female aging process. The egg release no longer occurs regularly, and consequently, the women's estrogen levels naturally decline over time. The reduced levels of estrogen result in a variety of symptoms, which is estimated will affect up to 85% of postmenopausal women. Many women seek advice from their GP, who can offer a variety of treatments and suggest lifestyle changes to help control the menopausal symptoms. However, the most common response is to offer some form of HRT treatment, and in the UK, HRT is used by around 66% of women for up to 5 years. HRT became commonly prescribed in 1960, eradicating most menopausal symptoms. Although HRT is widely used, non-medical interventions can also play an important part in managing the symptoms of menopause, such as adopting a low-fat or vegetarian diet, taking more exercise, quitting smoking and reducing general stress.
Nonetheless, with so many obvious and clinically proven benefits, many women opt for HRT medication, and following recent changes in government legislation in the UK, HRT prescription costs will be reduced, making HRT accessible to women from all economic backgrounds.
It is clear there are many benefits from HRT for the women who use it, but what's in it for those who produce it? At its peak, in 2001, Premarin held a global annual sales of more than 2 billion. However, in 2002, research showed it to have negative side effects, which led to sales declining by more than 50% to around 880 million by 2004. Since then, improved education on appropriate low doses have led to a partial recovery, which recently increased in prescription levels. Conjugated estrogen drugs come in two main forms: PMU estrogen, such as Premarin, and fully synthetic alternatives, estradiol and estriol, but these are less commonly prescribed. Whilst animal rights groups have protested against the PMU industry, arguing it is no longer necessary, as synthetic alternative options are now readily available, their protests have had little impact.
It is thought that most women are unaware that they are being prescribed a product which requires horses to be kept in such unacceptable conditions, and that even fewer know that a synthetic alternative is readily available.
For the horse breeding ranchers who expanded into PMU production in the 1940s, PMU has generated significant revenue for 80 years and now forms an integral part of their business. The exact revenue generated by PMU is difficult to assess. However, estimates suggest each mare will produce up to 100 gallons of urine per season, which in 1998 was reportedly worth £1,817. Whilst I have been unable to find a more modern reference, allowing for the effect of inflation, the revenue per mare is now likely to be around £3,400 per year. At the peak of the PMU production in 1990s, there was approximately 500 ranchers with 70,000 mares, so 30 years ago PMU delivered an average revenue per ranch of almost £250,000. Little wonder the ranchers welcomed and embraced it. I believe that four main ethical principles can be applied to the PMU industry: contactarian, relational, utilitarian, and deontological, and I will consider these in turn, from the perspective of the key stakeholders and the consumer.
Contactarianism assumes any relationship is based on a form of contract or agreement, and even though it may be in favour of one party, some things can only be achieved with help from others. Therefore, by working together, an activity can take place. Within the PMU industry, a contract is made between the pharmaceutical companies and the farmers who own the horses to provide the PMU urine, which is then used to create the HRT drugs. There is a monetary gain for both parties, which fulfills the contractual obligation. Controversially, as horses are not deemed able to enter an agreement, there is no contract between the horses and the ranchers, although there is evidence to suggest that some species, like apes and elephants, do enter an agreement with moral traits. However, during the collection process, if the horses need care, the ranchers will provide it. So even without any contractual obligation, the ranchers demonstrate an indirect duty of care to these animals. It could also be argued that it is in the best interest of the industry to demonstrate good equine welfare, as without it there is a risk that the end consumer may not use the HRT drug it produces.
Public pressure can be powerful, as seen in the last Olympics, where the modern-day pentathlon rider was criticised for the overuse of the whip. This resulted in the sport losing its social licence to operate and subsequently removed from the pentathlon.
Relational principles have a mutual respect and relational engagement at their core, balancing mortality with the way in which a person views the relationship with an animal and their duty of care which stems from this relationship. Ranch owners might acknowledge a relationship with the PMU horses and consider their care and well-being because the PMU horses help to generate their income. However, as these ranchers must have generated an income without the PMU mares previously, the rancher owners are clearly opting for a monetary gain ahead of the welfare of their horses, which could be perceived badly by the public, as this is a general expectation that horses are better treated than other farm animals. Arguing that because the drugs they produce help so many women across the world, that any suffering for the horses in the process is justified.
Equally, the patient that uses the HRT would argue that disadvantages for the horses are outweighed by their benefits, and others may argue that humans have more rights than animals. Some may say, as many people use HRT, and I'm only one person, even if they stop taking the HRT, the industry would continue regardlessly.
The deontological position would be the view of animal rights activists who believe that irrespectively of the benefits from the HRT, the suffering inflicted on the animals is unacceptable, and they would argue the end does not justify the means. This is somewhat controversial ethical position, does not consider any form of balance between the pros and the cons of the situation, and ignores any negative consequences if the activity was ended. Having looked at the different philosophical and ethical positions in respect of the PMU industry, I will now explore the options to improve the situation.
In a German study, cows were successfully trained to toilet in the same place, and I believe this approach could be adapted in the equine PMU industry. Initially, cows were placed in the Mooloo pen and rewarded with food for urinating. The next step was to encourage the cows to enter the pens and urinate at will, with a food reward again used as positive reinforcement. If the cow urinated outside the pen, they were sprayed with water for 3 seconds as a disincentive. By the end of 10 training sessions, 75% of the cows were successfully urinating in the pen 75% of the time. If this collection method were introduced within the PMU horses, they would no longer need to be penned in. Whilst the 25% loss of urine volume could impact financially, this process would mean horse numbers need not to be limited by the number of stalls in the collection sheds, so ranchers could potentially expand their herd in fields, and more horses could even cover any urine volume loss, potentially even leading to an increase in overall yield. Over time, it may be possible to further improve urine volume by selectively breeding from only those mares receptive to the training method. If the mare continues to toilet regime with foal at foot, the foal may naturally adopt this process without any need for specific training. Further benefit for the ranchers could be reduced labour costs and less need to treat minor injuries and rubbing sores caused by the tiny stalls and harnesses. Although these PMU mares would still not be living a truly natural life, they would be free to roam outdoors in a herd environment, which I believe would be a major step forward in their care and welfare. However, for this to become a reality, funding for the trial would have to be secured, which may prove difficult.
For those involved in the care and management of equines in the UK, it seems inconceivable that these conditions for the PMU mares are in any way acceptable. However, the huge sums of money associated with the PMU industry have led to many to turn a blind eye to the issues in the past. Although, more recently, even in North America, the tide is beginning to turn and questions have begun to be asked of the industry.
NERIC is a non-profit association to help improve the PMU production. It provides the latest research on management, care and breeding, and supplies marketing for the PMU foals. The council takes the allegations made against the industry very seriously and claims that equine ranchers are dedicated to utilising the most advanced animal husbandry techniques to ensure their horses receive a high quality of care and attention, and that the industry operates under a science-based management approach.
Indeed, equine ranching has now more animal welfare checks and balances than any other livestock industry, making it one of the most regulated and closely inspected equine-related activities in the world. So hopefully things are finally moving in the right direction for the PMU mares.
As a final consideration, if we look at how the PMU operates currently and compare the practices against the 5 freedoms, as you can see, the comparison is far from favourable.
As I have tried to demonstrate, PMU is an intrinsic part of a multi-billion-dollar HRT drug business, and although synthetic estrogen alternatives potentially could replace it, there is little incentive for the industry to change the synthetic alternatives, because the drug reformulation process would be time-consuming and costly. Consequently, unless or until the end users of HRT have a better understanding of the unsatisfactory conditions that the PMU horses endure in the production, and therefore refuses to use it unless changes are made, it seems that the best hope for improvement in the conditions for these mares will come from the NARIC Council, who need to be true to their word and quickly deliver on their promises.